Should a model railroad strive to be realistic or believable? And is there a difference between those two things? And if so, what is the difference? Well, stick around to find out, because that is the topic of discussion for today's Workbench Wednesday. Howdy folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio on a Workbench Wednesday. Hope your day is going great whenever and wherever you happen to be watching today. So believability versus realism. What does that mean? What am I talking about here? Believability is a term that comes from the world of writing, from movies, from television, from novels and stuff like that, from fiction. But it doesn't only apply to fiction. You don't often hear it used, to describe models. But it's a topic I'm greatly interested in. Maybe I'm the only one interested in it, and that's why we never hear anybody talk about it. But when I was young, when I was just getting started in the hobby, and I would just devour every single issue of Model Railroader magazine as they came out, and Railroad Model Craftsman, and Narrow Gauge and Short Line Gazette, and all those. Realism was the ultimate goal to all modeling. I mean, it was accepted without question that a model should look realistic. The more realistic it was, the higher the quality of the model. That was the metric at use there. And it was used in articles, in editorials, by advertisers. This is the most realistic version of this 282 Mikado ever created. Now it makes sense that realism is put forward as the ultimate goal in model making. We're making miniatures. Obviously, what are we making miniatures of? Real things. So, it's easy to understand. It's easy to explain. Believability is a little bit more of a nuanced concept. And, calling a model realistic back in the day was an excellent way to differentiate it from toy trains. So you'd say this HO scale model is incredibly realistic, and this Lionel model is a toy train. So that was a way to differentiate between the two. I've had people look at the Thunder Mesa layout and look at different scenes and say, man, that is incredibly realistic. It just draws me right in. And I've had other people, see the same scene, maybe online or something like that, and say, that's not realistic at all. That's just a total fantasy. Model, real railroads wouldn't be built that way, et cetera, like I didn't know that. But the thing is, they're both kind of wrong in a way. When someone says my modeling is realistic, I do take it as the compliment that it's intended, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, no, it isn't really that realistic. It's actually believable, and that's what draws you in. Model making is an illusion. All model making is illusion. We are illusioneers when we build miniatures. We are recreating something at a much smaller scale and asking people to believe it's a representation of the real thing. This should probably go without saying, but model trains are not real trains. Your HO scale Mikado does not actually run on steam, no matter how accurate the number and placement of the rivets are. We are creating the illusion of a miniature world, not recreating the world in miniature, and that is actually a pretty important distinction. The rocks are fake, the trees are fake, the sky is fake, the people are fake, the trains are fake. Fake, 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 fake. So while your ultimate goal might be for your layout to look and sound and even operate as close to the real thing as it possibly can, everything you put into it will be the result of your personal choices. What you leave in, what you leave out, what you add that isn't really there, the color palette that you choose. All of those things are the choices, the functions of an artist. You're not recreating reality so much as you're reinterpreting it through the lens of your own personal choices, tastes, and experiences. It really can be no other way. But if you do it well, what you end up with is a believable illusion. If we are illusionists and storytellers, as I contend, what is it we're really trying to get across here? Well, it's the believable illusion that this miniature world could actually exist somewhere. Most of us are familiar with this concept from things like movies and television and novels, where it's usually known as suspension of disbelief, where the creator uses clues from reality, sights and sounds and places and things, to draw the audience in, to make them suspend their disbelief long enough to get involved in the story. I think the goal of a good model railroad should be the same. As artists, as illusionists, as storytellers, we draw from reality. Another way to put it is that reality is the palette, but it's not the painting. Realistic details reinforce recognition. If something looks and sounds like a train, the viewer, the audience, will believe it's a train, even though it's not a train, it's a model. Another point I want to make is that realism is actually a stylistic choice, but it's not the only choice. One can choose to model something as realistically as possible based on old photos and research and everything else in order to help get that particular story across. This is particularly true with prototype modelers. If you're modeling, the Penzi in 1952, you want to do a lot of research to tell that story accurately. So the stylistic choice of realism is one that you might make. On the other hand, you might want to take off on a complete flight of fancy and do something that nobody's ever seen before and salt in just enough clues from reality to create that recognition to make that story believable. I really can't stress enough that those are both equally valid options for the creative artist, the modeler, the illusionist in miniature, if you will. You can build the most realistic thing possible, a very historically accurate model if that's what you want to do, or you could do something with dragons and dwarves in it if that's what you want to do. The door is wide open. You have the permission to model whatever it is you want. Now, a strict adherence to realism is the common stylistic choice for prototype modelers, but it doesn't change the fact that what they're creating is a believable illusion. Here, I'll give you an example from my own recent experience. The La Mesa Model Railroad Club in San Diego showcases the Tehachapi Loop area with an incredibly high degree of realism. That's their stylistic choice there. But they also use selective compression. The Tehachapi Loop they model is not the same size at scale as the Tehachapi Loop in real life. They've also made choices about the season to model, the color palette, things like that. It's spring. Everything's green and beautiful in that area on the Tehachapi Loop. But in reality, most of the time in that area of California, everything is drab and brown and dry. An argument could be made that since that's the way it looks most of the time, it would be more realistic to model it that way. But that is not the choice that they made. Why? Because it wouldn't be as interesting to look at. All of this is very good news if your goal is believability rather than realism, because it helps you to focus all of your modeling choices going forward. Say you want to model this very intricate structure, but it's only going to be viewed from 2 or 3 sides. Well, realistically, you would model the whole thing. You would show the back, the front, the interior, everything. But if you take the more theatrical approach of believability, you only model what is going to be seen by the viewer. Saves a lot of time, a lot of grief, and a lot of materials, frankly. So when someone says this or that model is realistic, I think what they really mean is that it's believable. It's believable enough to hold their interest and draw them into the story and make them want to look closer. As a freelance modeler that draws from multiple sources and inspirations, telling a story that is believable and entertaining is the ultimate goal. But that brings up another interesting point, one I've talked about before. Who are we telling this story to? Who's the audience? What is believable for some might not be believable for others. Uh, a model or scene that you create might be great for general audiences, but it might not work at all for someone who's an expert in the area that you happen to be modeling. You might have left something in or gotten some detail wrong. This has happened to me more than once. It's probably happened to you too. That's why it's so important to do your research so you'll know which parts of the reality palette to draw from to create a believable model. As an example, I like old Western movies and TV shows, but I also happen to know a lot about 19th century firearms and fashion and architecture. So, on a show like, say, Bonanza, where they're walking around with Colt single action armies and it's supposed to be pre-Civil War, that kind of pulls me out of the story a little bit because that detail is 100% wrong. And the point of all this is that the amount of deviation from reality you can get away with in a model depends greatly on your intent, what you intend the model to be and who you intend the model to be for. Who is the intended audience? A lot of times I'll get criticism from strict prototype modelers, but to be honest, they are not the audience for Thunder Mesa or for 99% of the modeling that I do. My modeling is aimed at general audiences, much like a Disney park. At Disneyland, the streets in Frontierland are paved with concrete, not mud, even though mud would be much more realistic. But the goal there is a themed experience to immerse guests in that time and place using visual clues and auditory clues from reality. It's an artistic interpretation of the real thing, not the real thing. In other words, a believable illusion. So I try to salt in enough visual cues from that realism palette to get the story across and have viewers suspend their disbelief. A lot of what I do may not appease the rivet counters, but that's okay. I don't really care. They're not the intended audience for this. Much like Disneyland, this is kind of a themed experience where what I'm trying to do is create a space for interesting and entertaining stories to happen. That is the most important consideration, at least for me. Summing up, realism is a tool for creating believable models, not necessarily the goal. Realism leads to recognition. Recognition leads to believability, and believability is what makes the model, the story, the illusion work. I want to thank you all so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, we can carry on the conversation in the comments down below. Also, please like, subscribe, share, and hit that notification bell if you'd like to see more from Thunder Mesa Studio. You can also follow us over on Instagram at thunder.mesa. See what's new on the Thunder Mesa Studio website at thundermesa.studio. And if you really enjoy what we're doing here at the channel and would like to show your support, you can do what these fine folks did and head on over to patreon.com/thundermesa and show your support there. Until next time, keep moving forward, my friends. Keep it real. Adios for now.